the DC Department of Energy and the Environment, also known as DOEE, and the Maryland Clean Energy Center, MCEC. We and other partners, nonprofit and for-profit, also work with these three main groups in order to provide our constituents, the folks in the market, with information about CPACE. And also including in that group is the Virginia Energy Efficiency Council, who are hosting our webinar. So next slide, please. I think most of you probably are aware of what CPACE is, Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy. But just in case, we're going to show you this quick slide to give you an idea about how impactful it is and how we are seeing how it's growing every day here in our tri-state area. So basically, it's a unique way of financing a wide variety of building improvements related to energy efficiency, renewable energy, water conservation, and in Virginia and DC, stormwater, and in Virginia also resiliency measures. So basically there's lots of different kinds of improvements you can use with CPACE, and these are something that are very helpful when you're either upgrading your building or building a new building. And here are some of the reasons why. Unlike pretty much any other mechanism out there, you get 100% financing of all hard and soft costs. Basically, you're able to use private financing to to get this financing and get your building improved. It provides long-term fixed rate financing, which is not that easy to get at competitive rates. And it basically always stays with the building. This is what's so unique about it. It basically never accelerates, and it's transferred until it's paid off at the end of the term. So if I'm a property owner and I sell my building, and the next property owner would continue to make the PACE payment, loan payment or assessment payment, just like they were going to pay their property taxes. This is something we think is very valuable. So next slide, please. And we just want to point out that in almost every locality throughout our area in the Mid-Atlantic region, you can use commercial PACE for all types of commercial buildings, industrial, multifamily, agriculture, and even vacant land and nonprofit buildings. In Loudoun County, for the moment, multifamily is not allowed, but we anticipate that changing in the fall. So I just wanted to give that refresher for 1 minute and then move right into our three panelists for today. I'm very excited because they really offer a wealth of expertise with respect to both CPACE and solar. So first, I want to introduce you to our first presenter, who is John Burns. He's a solar developer for the Taylor Street Storage Solar Plus Green Roof project in the District of Columbia. John is a partner at Adler Financial Group, and they are primarily focused on development projects as well as their own private lending programs. John has personally managed over 500,000 square feet of development in the DC area, focused largely in the self-storage sector. He holds both his BA and MA from the University of Virginia, and he lives in DC in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. Our speaker after John will be Paul Furman with Sustainable Energy Systems. He will discuss the installation of the solar array at the Frederick Indoor Sports Facility, among other work they have done. He is the Director of Business Development and Partner Relations since 2017. And he previously worked as Vice President of Sales for, I don't know how to pronounce this, Yoskin or Xskin, and also worked as a fabricator when he ran his own company for many years. And last but certainly not least is Michelle Patale. She's a medical doctor, she's an MD, medical doctor, and managing director of retrofits for Counterpoint Sustainable Real Estate Solutions. Prior to focusing on sustainable energy finance and joining Counterpoint to head their retrofit desk, Dr. Patale was an assistant professor of surgery, and I don't think I can pronounce this, otolaryngology. Michelle, can you unmute yourself and tell me how to pronounce that?
Probably easiest to say ENT.
Okay, let's do that. PMT at Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York. Dr. Vitale was also a surgeon at the NIH in Bethesda, Maryland, at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and a postdoc research fellow in the Critical Care Medical Department of the NIH. Receiving her medical degree from Temple University School of Medicine in Philly, Dr. Vitale completed her residency at SUNY Downstate in New York and Georgetown University Hospital in Washington, D.C. She holds a BS in chemistry from Uniata College in Pennsylvania, and she has published peer-reviewed research articles in surgical oncology and cytokine research, as well as surgical chapters in critical care textbooks. Her background provides an expertise in PACE healthcare and other retrofit projects, as well as a unique perspective on the scientific and business needs of sustainable real estate markets. So I'm very excited to have this panel today. And with that, I would like for John to lead us off to talk about his project in DC. John?
Sure. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking some time. I hope this is useful to many of you in different contexts. I guess we can start with slide number 7. A little bit of background. The group that I work with, Adler Financial Group, has developed real estate in the DC area since the 1970s. We are heavy in industrial and as a subset of that asset class, specifically self-storage. This facility is our first managed by Extra Space, but is probably, I guess, our 6th in the DC area. And it was a challenging project. We, in a couple of ways, we slipped in kind of 2 days ahead of DC's rezoning in September of 2016, which allowed us a couple of different grandfathered aspects to take advantage of what was the old industrial zoning. So we were able to build a building that is pretty attractive from the outside and stands out among the neighborhood, which is mostly 1- or 2-story brick buildings and residences. And it's in the Petworth neighborhood of DC, a popular neighborhood in Northwest that's accessible from downtown and many of the other neighborhoods. And it's historically very, very underserved with storage. So we were excited about the project and excited to get the site. Again, this was probably 2015 that we acquired it, 2016 that we got permits, and we're about a year and maybe 10 months in construction. And from pretty much the day that we acquired the site in 2015, we started trying to figure out how we could get solar panels on the rooftop for a variety of reasons, one of which is being an environmentally conscious business owner, but the big one being that the SREC market in Washington, D.C. specifically is just hard to beat, impossible to beat across the rest of the country, given all of the supply-demand dynamics. So we really aggressively pursued solar and hit a number of roadblocks, most notably the fact that in any new development, ground-up development in Washington, D.C., you need a green roof, which is 4 inches of soil plus some sedum plants, and that stores stormwater to keep the city's sewer systems from being overburdened. And the city, the Department of Energy, had a hard time with even just beginning conversations as to how we were going to overlay a solar array on top of a living, breathing, effective green roof. For a while, we tried to argue that, and we had science backing us up, that the shading provided by a solar array would actually help the livelihood of the green roof, because the sedum plants prefer to be a little bit cooler and not just totally baked in the sunlight. And then secondly, so we started to get some traction, but then the Department of Energy said, well, you can do that, but you can't count the square footage directly under the solar panels as square footage for green roof. And we said, well, that's sort of ridiculous. If rainwater hits the solar panel, it's going to slide off the solar panel and eventually make its way into the same green roof system and spread itself out through the green roof. So that shouldn't really make a difference. And sure enough, 1 or 2 civil engineering bills later, we were able to successfully lobby that point. And the ultimate compromise was that this particular array would not be the most efficient if you were just looking at X many panels that you could fit on a 20,000 square foot rooftop space, because we'd have to space out the rows, the panel rows a little bit to allow some more sunlight and some walkable space for maintenance of the green roof. We have to tilt the panels a little bit away from their most effective position so that more sunlight and more rain would be allowed and able to hit the sedum plants in the green roof. And in doing that, it added a little bit of wind weight. It decreased the efficiency of the system a bit. But when we finally got down to the bottom line numbers, it still totally made sense for us to pursue solar green roof. And we're proud to be the first solar/green roof array in the city. And my last note there is just that this is a joint venture between us and the financial group and partners, Lock 7 Development, who's an active developer in DC. If we could go to the next slide, 8. Just a couple quick notes. We pursued PACE financing. We had a traditional first deed of trust as a construction loan to put up the bricks and sticks of the facility. And as we were going through the solar route, we were connected to Urban Ingenuity and started to become familiar with the PACE financing programs. And it's very hard as a developer to turn away 100% financing for anything, particularly at what at the time was and remained pretty attractive rates. And so we worked with Urban Ingenuity and gave all of our engineering reports and assumptions of what the finances should and would look like and cross-warranty information, all of that. They went out and got 4 or 5 different bids from different groups, and we ultimately chose United Bank, which is a local community bank, as the final lender. Urban Ingenuity sort of acts as a servicer and broker. And the system stats, admittedly, I'm a self-storage developer. I'm not a solar developer. I'm not an expert in why these were chosen. These are just what were recommended. But 285 watt panels, modules, 462 total modules to produce an array that was 131 kilowatts, expected to produce about 180 megawatt hours annually. In the first year, so that would have been 2019. We opened in the facility in November of 2018. The solar array opened most of the way through January of 2019. So 2019 was my first calendar year, and we missed part of January, but we were tracking very close to what we were expected to produce. SREC prices have remained strong and even increased dramatically in the city. So we've generally been very happy with that. If you can go to slide 9, next slide. These are a couple photos that I went back in the files and grabbed from the install. On the left and right, panels sort of in process, getting wired up and mounted on what at the time didn't have any sedum plants. It was just soil matter. And the walkways between the arrays for maintenance, and then on the right, when they were generally set up. And in the center, that's all of the space that is required for inverters within the electrical room of the facility, next to all of the normal electrical panels that would exist in a self-storage facility, but relatively unburdensome. All we needed was, I think, a 2-inch conduit running down through the center of the building from the roof to connect a couple of final wires. All of that is monitored remotely to my cell phone and an app that I have that tracks all of the solar. And the reporting is done third-party registered additionally with SREC Trade and Washington, D.C. and PEPCO, so that those third-party monitors get reports sent to every respective sort of shareholder or vendor related to what's now a totally operational system. Again, I'm not an expert. Our installers did this for us, but it was seamless. It was plug and play. It really, in the grand scheme of headaches in real estate, it was not even in need of one Advil for this one. If we can go to the next slide, 10, just to date, or as of a couple days ago, we've produced 232 megawatt hours. That is equivalent to 360,000 pounds of CO2 emissions saved, or 2,700 trees planted. That is, a statistic that runs alongside all of the financial benefits, which have been wonderful, and quick depreciation, federal tax credits. But those are great, but they're there in order to support the environmental benefits that are substantial. So it feels good to see those numbers and to get the sense that we're doing our part for the kind of greater ecosystem. If we go to the next slide, that is a photo taken this spring of some very happy sedums tucked underneath the solar arrays, and is the product of lobbying a variety of different groups and going through the headache of development and financing, but is now a living, breathing ecosystem that I think that photo speaks 1,000 words. We've been very pleased with the project in all capacities, and are going to be starting to break ground on a second project very similar to it towards Silver Spring, but still in DC on Blair Road at the moment. And so it's something that we're hoping to repeat, and PACE financing was a big part of making the project pencil and making it a success. Very easy to accomplish, and it's something that I'd be happy to discuss with any of the shareholders on this call. I'm sure you can get my email or contact information from the organizers of the call, and I'd be happy to discuss, because I think that it's an industry where the rising tides float all boats. If we're all after trying to make an impact on the environment, the more projects that are out there to do that, the better. And I'm happy to be a resource for anyone trying to get their own projects off the ground. So that's all I've got. Look forward to answering questions when the time comes.
Thank you, John. That was really, really interesting. I'm going to take the purview or the benefit of being the moderator and asking you just two really quick kind of follow-up questions while it's fresh.
Sure.
Yeah, quickly. So in terms of, obviously this is it's great for the environment. You're producing energy. It's met most of the financial, I guess, benchmarks you had. Do you, has this helped in terms of marketing your facility in any way?
It's an interesting question. It kind of helps that Extra Space's colors are green for all of their marketing. And so we sort of thought for a while, there's probably something to be done here. We never flaunted it. We never had an article written. Admittedly, this and a couple other webinars are as close as we've gotten to really calling it out specifically. We do have a couple photos in the office, but while I think that customers would love to know that they're supporting a greener facility than most, self-storage is an incredibly price-sensitive industry, and I think at the end of the day, the lowest price unit is what's going to win. But we've incorporated it, but I don't think it's had a ton of noticeable impact.
Yeah, it's not like an apartment building where you potentially are consuming much
right.
less. Yeah.
Right.
And the other really quick question is, you mentioned SRECs. Did you all end up using those, or can you describe a little bit more about how you incorporated that into your financial analysis?
Right. So, SRECs, solar renewable energy credits, for every 1,000 kilowatt hours produced or 1 megawatt hour, you're entitled to a virtual certificate that can be sold on the open market to the highest bidders. Because Washington, D.C. has so many green energy goals, as coupled with the fact that Washington, D.C. does not have the acreage of a state like California to put solar arrays just on the ground at farms or highways or whatever, there's a very interesting, lucrative supply-demand dynamic there. SRECs in the state of Pennsylvania sell for $20 or $30, maybe $40. I haven't checked recently. In the state of Massachusetts, at least at the time, Massachusetts was touted as just totally ludicrously priced at $250 or $300. In DC, they've pushed $400. So it just starts to compound in a way compared to other municipalities or states that is hard to resist. Virginia at the moment doesn't have its own SREC market. I believe the setup is that you're allowed to then sell on a couple other states' markets, Pennsylvania being one of them, if you have SRECs in Virginia. But we entered a 5-year forward contract when the facility opened with a buyer that we were connected to through the SREC trade platform, and have agreed that every SREC our facility produces until 2023 is sold to them at what then was a very competitive fixed price. As of today, we would have done better if we floated on the market, but I suppose that 2 years from now, prices could change either in our favor or not. We're happy to know that the consistent income's coming in. It's, just as a side note, it's very interesting to note that sort of a monthly check from the SREC revenue will be more than twice as much in a month like July or August than it would be in December or January, just because of the amount of sunlight and energy produced. So it's sort of an interesting number to track from a revenue standpoint as the year goes on and the weather changes. But we've been very happy.
Well, that's great. Of course, it allows you to figure out your returns very consistently, knowing you have that 5-year fixed
Yep.
amount. Yeah. So thanks for that. I appreciate that. I find that it's a beautiful project. So thanks for sharing. I just want to move on now, if you don't mind forwarding to our next presenter. So Paul, I know we have this actually as one of our case studies as well on our pacealliance.org website, which is our MAPA website.
Yep.
So I'll just let you take it from here and talk about this great project you worked on.
Fantastic. No, thanks for all y'all's time coming out today and getting behind the computer and doing this. Kind of a brief look into the project. In 2017, I started working for Sustainable Energy Systems, which, side note, is actually owned and partnered with my childhood best friend. The Frederick Indoor Soccer Plex has been a place where myself and my colleagues have been playing soccer for over 15 years now. And it was always kind of a unicorn for us because it had a Solar City sign hanging up in it for years. And I had the opportunity one day to sit in front of Tony and Roby, the owners of the company, to go over this PACE funding. PACE funding was brought to me by Heather Graham of Frederick County Business Development and Gerard Neely. And it just made sense for us. For this particular project, their particular building, this one here, is evolving field maintenance, new turf, just constantly evolving. And actually today they're looking to expand this building into almost doubling the size. So in sitting with Tony and Roby, they wanted to make sure that, financially, that they would be able to keep on moving with the evolution of FISC. So with PACE, with all the hard and soft costs covered, once again, it just made sense. There was a couple hurdles in the road. Of course, the SREC market at one time was extremely low in Maryland. And of course, a lot of these lien holders or, the people who actually, carry the tab on the actual building itself, they want to make sure that the actual owner of the building will see some form of like year one savings, at least with the ones that I've dealt with. So we had to make sure that, we ran it tight, that, the numbers were on it, production was on it. And as you can tell, the system that we're currently installing right now is actually 444 kW system. So with this project and with it being so unique, it also allowed us to kind of get really innovative on how we actually, affix it to the roof, engineering, and production numbers. We're predominantly an EPC partner. We like design, development, and building. We're master electricians. We're all blue collar here. We have a very, very, very small in-house sales. So that being said, to do a project like this in our backyard was really great. After everything was all said and done, and with us being able to kind of manipulate the design on the northern facing roof, what you see in this picture here, by changing the racking and the actual system mounting points, we're actually able to place the mods more of a southern facing pitch by 5 degrees, which actually dramatically increased the production of the system. So estimations right now from a 440 kW system, we're looking to produce 520 plus kW, which is extremely exciting for us, which ultimately exceeds their monthly usage, which saves them on average over $9,000 a month in energy bills. So we're very excited for this project. But like I said, the key feature for us, other than, it's a great job, it's a landmark, it is the largest solar-only project funded by PACE in Maryland. It's the 4th largest overall project Maryland PACE funded. So like I said, other than it being that exciting, it's been a great learning curve for all of us in how to use PACE for other projects. We also did BART, which is a local youth camp funded by CPACE.
Paul, are you complete? I had a few questions for you whenever
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. So I just want to point out, thank you for showing us this project that we know that it was, we actually, it was nominated by Maryland Clean Energy Center's subcontractor, PACE Financial Servicing, for a national award. It was a finalist because it's so impressive that it was, the largest one in the area, and something that's really a showcase to the DC region. So I'm sure Jessa, who's the current program manager, worked with you on that, but I just wanted to point out that it definitely was presented as a national model to our national PACE Nation organization. I also want to ask you, in terms of, because it's a sports facility and you mentioned that, your families have gone there, and maybe you brought this up, but could you talk more if there's an educational component? I mean, do kids know about it? How do you show how it works, or can you talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's really exciting about this is, with all this being actually installed as we speak, I have crews there today. We'll be installing a giant projection screen that will actually have real-time production and slideshow of it being installed, with offsets, with CO2 emissions, with, light financials, and just kind of like a Q&A session that gets broadcasted constantly during the business hours. And then once a week, we're actually hosting just kind of like a small neighborhood symposium for other businesses and for other residents to go solar.
Well, that's really great. That's really, as I think, as much as people hear about solar, it's really important to understand how it can work on their facility. And the best way to see that is to have someone, expert like you, to be able to show what you've done and talk about it in detail. So I think this is a really great project, and I look forward to seeing it sometime soon once.
No, absolutely.
Locked down. And really, just to highlight again, for this particular building owner, would you, whom I guess really well,
Mm-hmm.
what was the number one thing about CPACE that made the sale? Was it the 100% financing, or the term, or the rate, or what exactly?
It was definitely, definitely a bunch of features. I mean, like I said, the fact that they didn't have to stroke checks to get it done, because at the same time, they're, like I said, revamping 2 of their big fields indoors, which was an exorbitant sum of money for them. 2, it doesn't ding their actual credit, like what they're actually available to get through banks to actually finance other, evolutions of the building. This place also has, a rehab facility and other commercial office buildings on the 2nd story. So it allows them to constantly, better their facility to be more attractive to other businesses to work inside that building.
Absolutely. And did, and if I understand correctly, the owner of the facility actually owns the SREC, or it's not a power purchase agreement?
No, he owns it. It's his. The SRECs are his, the federal tax credit's his, everything is his. Right,
because he had that tax liability that he could take advantage of, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. And what's really great is that, the tenants, he has quite a few tenants in this building, all private offices, boardrooms, like I said, there's also a restaurant in there. It's far more marketable for these people to say, oh, by the way, you're not going to have a utility bill here.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's amazing, because it's unusual in that it really, covers all of the electricity uses. So that's really great. So thanks a lot, Paul, for that. And we'll get to certainly particular questions at the end of the session, but I appreciate your presentation. And I want to move on to our last panelist, Michelle Batale. Can you please, take solar and then expand across some of the other things that CPACE can provide in this current environment?
Great. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide, please. So I thought I would give a brief overview on the impact COVID is having upon the solar industry, with implications for the property owner and installer. And then I pulled out some of our case studies of projects we have financed, solar projects that we have financed or contemplating financing, and did kind of a before and after of the impact of COVID on these particular jobs. As an overview, the organizations for solar and wind have asked Congress to consider extending the ITC and PTC safe harbor deadline, as well as some change for the ITC and other tax credits. The thought is that job sites, there's been some disruptions and some slowdowns, and there may not be time for the owners to take advantage because of the job slowdowns due to COVID. The Treasury Department has said on May 7th that they plan to modify the relevant rules. This, I would keep in mind that if you are thinking that you just look for the ITC credit because there are modifications coming to the rules. Next, please. So there have been minor sporadic job slowdowns. There's been supply chain delays in other industries. We haven't seen much in the solar industry. There has been some permitting timeline delays. What I'm seeing mostly is we are getting PTOs, but we're not getting final inspections from the city because the building inspectors are not coming out. Everything's been fairly modest, and the jobs have been going forth with maybe a week or two delay at this point. The main impact that I think the SEA and the wind organization are worried about is that as owner revenues decrease, they may not be able to invest in solar, and they may not have the ability to use the energy tax credits anymore. There's been some tightening in the liquidity in the tax equity market. We've been seeing mostly the larger PPAs that there's been a tightening in the tax equity component. The larger deals are going forth, especially those that are already in the pipeline. The smaller deals, there is some tightening in the availability of tax equity money. It is important to remember that solar is a small business industry with door-to-door sales, of which, next slide, please. The impact that is already being felt, and you can see the job loss projections by June of this year in the local area. 38% down jobs in the solar industry expected by June. Next slide, please. With this forecast for decreased energy use and decreased need for solar, with the lack of emphasis coming from the federal administration, there has been a concurrent increased demand for energy use throughout the commercial real estate sector. I pulled this up. This is the current ASHRAE guidelines for isolation rooms in hospitals. I'm in the process of closing a hospital deal on Thursday. And if you know, I highlighted the utilities for these isolation rooms must be connected to the essential power systems. Also, energy recovery systems are generally not to be used in hospital settings or any place, mostly because it decreases the amount of outside air and the amount of ventilation. All of this, I think, is, next slide, please. All of this is going to have an impact on the energy demands in commercial real estate. The impact of COVID on the real estate market, I think it's pretty well known that the hotel, retail, and senior living industries sector have been very negatively impacted, although CBRE is expecting that the hotel industry will rebound within the next year and a half, 2 years. The multifamily, student housing, and office sectors have been pretty flat, if not, they have shown resiliency to COVID. There's a student housing study that came out that showed that 70% of the kids are still living in their off-campus housing. 39% went home immediately, and then 10% went back and got out of their parents' house and went back. Everyone has been paying rents, and that market has been very, very attractive and has had little COVID impact. The warehouse and industrial sector, which is a real target for the solar industry, has been booming. There is thought of reshoring, bringing back manufacturing back to the United States, with the Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Texas hubs being targeted just because they're currently manufacturing hubs. But manufacturing has become more efficiency, and there is some thought of having multiple manufacturing centers that are smaller footprint, closer to the customer to decrease transportation costs. So we may see manufacturing starting to boom throughout the United States, which would have, they definitely are a target for the solar industry. Next slide, please. So I talked a little bit about project disruptions. The supply chain has not visualized yet, although the SEA did ask for a reduce in tariffs from it, but there's been little impact to that in the solar industry. So far, there's been little impact to the contractor workforce or to the solar designers. I have definitely seen lack of inspectors showing up on sites, and final inspections especially have been slow to happen. Next slide. As a solar installer, or when you're making a contract, these delays need to be considered into the contract. This is something I pulled from a legal site that is talking about all the considerations to put into your contracts to just plan for some kind of delay in construction. Next slide. So you can go next. Now we're going into the before and after, and I'm just going to ramble about this. So this is a straight PPA deal in Santa Barbara, California, where this is probably not going to end up being a PACE PPA. We're playing with it in California. Government and government-owned properties are eligible for PACE, unlike most states in the nation. We're not seeing any tightening in the tax equity, which is still going to be available for the PPA structure. Although we are seeing definitely tightening for the smaller PPAs. Next slide. This is a deal we closed. It's 2 hotels. The hotel industry, this owner, potentially attractive deal for he was in California. You do a 30-year term. He elected for 25, but the amortization schedule was very low. His extremely low. He had positive cash flow immediately as he was accruing savings before he even made the payment, which you can capitalize and defer up to 2 years in a lot of cases. But he also had large makers and an ITC. He offset it against his revenue. Now the hotel industry, I'm not sure they're going to have the revenue to take advantage of all these tax credits and depreciations, and so that may impact these type of solar deals. Next slide, please. In retail, I think this is a grab bag. What to predict? This is a deal we closed in Florida. Actually, it was multiple deals as Simon has been rolling through using PACE. They're one of the early adopters of PACE, mostly because most of their owners pay the property tax bill, and Simon can pass through the costs of the PACE to the individual franchisees or their tenants. Malls are an enclosed space with very little ventilation. In order for people to come and shop again, they're going to have to increase ventilation and do more measures. Some of those, as I showed in the isolation room, which may involve ultraviolet light on the recirculated air. There's going to be some increased measures. Long story short, they're going to need increased energy demand for this, and there's definitely going to be a need for solar on this to offset the increased costs and the increased HVAC use. One of the other recommendations from SREC, I think it was, was that you turn on the ventilation for a building 2 hours before use and then run it 2 hours after use, just to kind of clear out any particles that were aerosolized. So you can imagine for a facility like this, the energy demand and the need for a renewable source will be astronomical and will really affect operating expenses. Next slide, please. That made me think about resiliency overall. And in Florida, there were some lives lost due to a lack of HVAC during a hurricane, which resulted in Florida state legislature mandating generators for assisted living facilities and nursing homes. Next slide. And we had a project where this was a generator project that we did in Florida for a skilled nursing facility that as they were looking to supply power to the building, and they were mandated in order to give resiliency to the building, they had to do it through generator, but there was some thought to putting solar panels on this offset. It would have been more cost efficient, but it wasn't allowed by the legislation. But they also did a massive HVAC project at the same time. If you reduce the energy demand of the building, then your solar system will be more profitable for you, because there'll be less, they should go hand in hand, reducing the energy demand of the building as well as increasing the amount of renewable in order to make yourself more resilient. Next slide. So as far as resiliency and how solar can play a part, I pulled out the major power outages in last summer, and they all turned out to be over the summer, which made me kind of worried about what's coming down the road for this summer, and how prepared will our commercial real estate be for power outages when we're mandated, or certainly to have a safe environment, we need to increase ventilation. Next slide. Will there be a role in the future for solar and renewables in order to provide ventilation for buildings such as this is a solar deal we did with an affordable housing for seniors. This was with HUD consent. Will there be a role for solar to make these buildings more resilient so that these residents can remain safe and have their ventilation needs met? Opening the windows does not provide proper ventilation to protect against COVID because of air directions and other factors. Next slide, please. When I looked at this deal, this is a self-storage, so I didn't think there was really going to be any impact from COVID on the self-storage. Then I pulled up the job sites. Next slide. The job site photos, I noticed that the solar panels are very close to the exhaust of the building, which made me think about the workers, and they're getting exposed to all the exhaust of a building. Next slide. It's just something for any of the stallers that are listening to pay attention. Look at your wind direction, look at the exhaust of a building, and be cognizant, next slide please, of where you're standing. This is a hospital deal that we closed. If you're working on the top of a hospital, some of the exhaust air for the isolation rooms is exposed to ultraviolet, but a lot is not. I just would be careful around the exhaust when you're working up on the roof right now. Next slide. This is a warehouse mixed-use space, probably no impact to solar for COVID whatsoever. Next slide. I pulled up the job site from this one. This is the guys in, one, I would say that heavy breathing can aerosolize. It doesn't look like they're really heavy breathing. Next slide. How the installers are going to in that situation. This is the 6 feet difference. This is the study behind it and why they say stay 6 feet away from someone for aerosolized. Next slide. I don't know how they're going to do this, how they're going to separate properly and protect themselves on a job site. Aerosolized particle generation from COVID is from heavy breathing, as I said, shouting, singing. It's also from high pressure cleaning, or any kind of air turbulence these particles drop to the ground very quickly, but any kind of turbulence can rise it up in the air and aerosolize it. Next slide. There's multiple precautions you can take on a job site. I would say that designate an exposed person so that you don't lose your entire workforce. If that one person is the one that makes sure your runs to suppliers and the one that runs out for coffee or whatever, and then social distances from the rest of the crew, then you won't end up with a crew that has to spend 2 weeks in quarantine shutting down the job site. Consider portable hand washing stations for before lunch, after lunch. You may need to change masks after lunch because the one from the morning may be exposed. My pet peeve is how people are removing masks. Realize that as you raise your hands up to remove your mask, you are exposing everything that's on your hand, which is the most likely point of transmission to your nose. And I just ask to remove your gloves, wash your hands, do whatever you can to clean your hands, remove the mask by the straps, don't take it off by the front, and try not to contaminate yourself when you remove the mask. Next slide. In summary, Treasury will be issuing modifications to the existing regulations regarding tax credits, which will have implications to both the property owners that are looking to use tax credits, as well as to those that are looking for safe harbor from their 2019 jobs that may have had an interruption in construction. HVAC is an essential system in all buildings now. With the increased demand for ventilation, Some energy saving measures are being discontinued, such as demand control ventilation and energy recovery systems, which is increasing the demand of our buildings for energy. And power outages, as shown in Florida by Hurricane Irma, can have catastrophic consequences. Air quality is now being seen as a factor in resiliency. LEED credits are being given for air quality as far as controlling COVID transmission. And I see the renewable sector as being an essential contributor to resiliency in the COVID era.
Thank you, Michelle. That's a great presentation. Are you have anything more to add, or should I launch right in to our Q&A?
Launch right in, and I will say that was a lot. I went through it very quickly. If anybody wants to ask questions and email me separately, happy to go over. That was very broad. I wasn't sure if this was installers or property owners that were going to be in the audience.
I think we have everything. I think it was a great presentation because I think we do have a mix, and I think it's important to see some important precautions that installers should take, because it's a new normal. It's going to be that way for a while. So I really appreciate your case studies and also some of the precautions you laid out. I want a few really quick things about your presentation. I think you might have heard the same ASHRAE presentation I heard from the Department of Energy. They're doing I think Energy Star is doing a few of them this month about just ways to look at making your facility more secure with respect to COVID-19 and airborne illnesses. And so that is something just to take a look at under Energy Star and their series. Also, I think it's very important when you noted about the fact that we're going to have to increase our energy consumption in order to be safer. And so solar is going to be an integral part in achieving that. So I think that was a very important point that you made. So we have a lot of questions. We're probably not going to get through all of them. So I'm going to, we actually got some questions before we even started our webinar. So kudos to Frederick County for being extremely proactive. And their questions are, the first question, what are good ways to give businesses thinking about this who may not have had it on their radar, who don't know where to start? I'm assuming they're referring to solar. So 30 seconds, Paul, or can you give some, what's a good way of thinking about getting into the solar business? Just anything that comes off the top of your head, because we only have 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's way to get into the solar business. Learn offsets, learn engineering, learn offsets, learn DC.
Okay, that would be direct current, correct?
Yep. Correct.
Yeah, I know, because there are projects in DC. Their second question was, are there some ideal facility locations, designs, or sizes that are good candidates for rooftop solar as a way to focus outreach to businesses? So what I'm thinking is, this is the county saying, how can we help from our standpoint encourage our existing, building stock, or maybe from an economic development standpoint, how can we encourage use of solar? Do you have any ideal, either you or John want to talk about any particular type of locations or designs that would benefit a county like Frederick?
Absolutely. Personally speaking, like I said, we're a big nuts and bolts company here. Every time I see a stand and seam metal roof, it's exciting because the project itself, due to cost of materials, is cheaper on a stand and seam metal roof. And there's when we do stand and seam metal roofs, like the Sportsplex, there's actually no penetrations into the roof. They actually just clamp onto the seam itself. So super stable, super strong, and engineers love to see it.
And I'm assuming generally that kind of structure has enough, structural steel and can handle the weight of your solar array, correct?
Absolutely. It actually strengthens the roof because of the clamping method that we use. Right.
So it doesn't deflect. I've seen sometimes being on standing seam roofs, you'll find some indents and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really interesting to note and good to know, because there's a lot of standing seam metal roofs out there, certainly self-storage, a lot of industrial, warehouse, certainly some retail, lots of opportunities there. And this last question, I'm going to direct this to John. This is from Frederick County, Maryland. What are some good tips for contacting local lending institutions to encourage them to participate in funding smaller projects? Well, I guess that's could also be for all of you, but how did you come about, John, in terms of choosing Lord Capital, how was that process? How did you get to that stage where you, not Lord Capital, I'm sorry, the United Bank? How did you come to that bank?
Yeah, so we work with United in a variety of other contexts, so they were attractive compared to the others. And we always sort of prefer community banks compared to kind of national lenders or specific organizations that we don't otherwise work with. I think for Frederick County, the advice would be to come up with some kind of system like DC did, which made the payments of the loan tied to property tax payments and property tax bills. And in the case that we don't make one of our loan payments for the PACE financing, it triggers an event of default and orders of remedy very similar to if we didn't pay a real estate property bill, which means that, you know, they can come into the first position even ahead of a first deed of trust bank with bank financing and foreclose on the property. And that's obviously not something we want to happen. So making those payments are extremely important to us to be able to maintain ownership of the facility. And that, I think, gave local lenders an amount of comfort with the repayment process and remedies in the case of non-payment, that those lenders didn't view it as much of a risk at all. So I think these are good loans. The lenders are happy to have these loans, but I know that they had to work in concert with the municipality in which the loans reside in order to make them feel that way.
Absolutely. And I would say that also we're kind of lucky in our DC metro area, the DMV, that there's quite a few local and regional banks that participate in CPACE. It's not that way around the country. There are some pockets, but I think we're in a unique position where perhaps, you know, John Marshall Bank had heard of, you know, works with United Bank. Maybe they have the first deed of trust, but they're willing to subordinate because they know the project, they understand PACE. And so I feel like that's probably generally helpful. I don't know, would you agree?
Yep.
Cool. One last question for you, John, and then I'm gonna move on to a few additional questions. One participant asked, who's a PACE lender actually, Kevin Morris from Lever, he asked, I understand that Extra Space Storage has a corporate goal to add solar to as many of their facilities nationally as possible. Was your solar project driven by ESS for them to meet their corporate sustainability goals, or was it the decision to install solar your decision, Adler's? So yeah, that's
a very interesting question. I'll share. I had no idea that was the case. Extra Space has sort of two arms. One that is a management company, and the other of which is owns and develops assets. So this facility is in no way owned, 0%, by Extra Space Storage. They are simply a third-party manager that we entered into an agreement, for them to maintain long-term management of the facility. But the owners make all decisions. So we ran some design choices by them and entered an agreement that allowed us to use their name and colors and that sort of thing. But the design of this facility and whether or not to add solar was entirely our decision. This wouldn't be a facility that's technically within, quote unquote, their portfolio, certainly not the portfolio of ownership. And I have not heard anything about sort of their managed properties having those sorts of goals. So it's interesting. I don't know if they counted or not.
That's very interesting. Well, I think that's kind of shows you how there's still a lot of opportunity and also need to kind of educate different arms of the own company, right? Because this happens all over the place within local government, within large corporations, within even our industry, that the need to kind of learn as much about the others' goals to try to all, become more sustainable. So thank you for that. There's a few more questions. I'm going to kind of summarize. One individual, Musad Khalej Assad, asked for, I think for probably potentially Paul and John, but maybe also Michelle, because he asked us before she presented, if we can get high-level financial data and metrics on the projects. So we're going to send this out to the group, to you all, the presenters, and because it's kind of long, and see what you're able to provide, and then we can share with the group. So I just want to let you know that there was a question, acknowledge the question, and keep moving since we only have 2 more minutes. So one question I guess I have, here's a question from Ellen Egerton from Alexandria. She asked how much of a burden, percentage, or handling fee is a process to the municipality for handling the financing as part of the tax process. So basically, if you're going to keep the PACE assessment as part of the tax bill versus having a direct bill, which is what several of our counties do in Virginia, including Arlington, Fairfax, and Loudoun, how much of a burden is that to the local government? And then, so I just wondered if anyone, I'm not sure, this may be a question for someone besides the panelists, but if any of you all may know that, feel free to chime in.
So we administer programs in Florida, California, and for the city of Chicago. Right. And first, in most of our agreements, places, we have a separate agreement with the tax assessor and the tax collector, in which they are remunerated for their costs. Other than that, the only other particular cost, and that sometimes it can be positive. I'm closing a deal in Illinois right now that the city is getting a point as part of the closing fee, which we're doing direct bill, so they're not going to have any expenses really. The only other thing is we report to government, usually quarterly, sometimes they want it annually, on the energy savings, water savings, or amount of resiliency we financed, along with other metrics. Usually that goes to the sustainability officer for their reporting. Other than that, this is generally has no impact or no expense to the local municipality or county.
Yeah, and thank you, Michelle. I think that's really important to highlight. We also concur with that in Virginia and our markets. The same with, I believe, in DC and Maryland. It's really very low cost, or, it's more about getting it set up initially and how much the local government wants to be involved. And then it's really on the third party administrator to handle the vast, the burden of running the program. So we are at the top of the hour. We do have a few more questions. So what we're going to do is going to send them out to our panelists to respond to, and then we'll send out a follow-up email with those answers. We very much appreciate your time today. It's a really great panel. Thank you so much to our three panelists, John, Michelle, and Paul, for your time today. Thanks for everyone for participating. And we have another webinar upcoming in June. Is it June 6th, Jessica? Can you confirm that date for me?
June 9th, I believe. June
9th, thank you. And that's going to be on CPACE and with local lenders. So please join us for that webinar. You can check the pacealliance.org website. Thanks again, and have a great short week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Abby.
Thank you.